This episode is sponsored by Fastly, the application security leader and edge cloud platform behind many top digital experiences. Fastly helps organizations deliver and secure online experiences for their end users through a modern, developer-friendly approach to security. With their next-gen WAF, bot management, and DDoS protections, teams have the tools they need to ensure their applications and APIs perform at their best without sacrificing speed or reliability. Discover how Fastly transforms security into an enabler for digital innovation at securityweekly.com/Fastly. Welcome back to Enterprise Security Weekly. Now for the Enterprise Security Weekly news. Check out securityweekly.com/ESW396 if you want to follow along as we go through the news, or for links to the articles we're covering, or for any of the commentary on these. So one of these funding and acquisitions, I just piled all into one. So that's all contained within one of these stories, and hopefully helps from making it a little too overwhelming. And we don't have to talk about all these, but starting off with funding and acquisitions, I thought Whalebone was pretty interesting. This looks like I can't tell if it's related to that startup that Robert Downey Jr. is doing ads for, because it's called Aura, and they have something called Aura, and it's like a consumer-focused cybersecurity app. So I didn't have enough time to validate, see whether that's the same one, but it's a Czech-related or Czech headquartered and founded company. But it looks like they're selling to ISPs and telecoms and stuff like that. So they're trying to, like you sign up for AT&T and you get the security app. That's just part of, your mobile, like a perk you get with your mobile subscription.
Yeah. Well, Aura needs to work on their SEO, because even when I Googled Robert Downey Jr. Aura, it was like the 15th thing that came up, but it does look, I think it's the same company.
Yeah, because I think he's an investor. And we're seeing a lot more of this. We're seeing celebrities investing in, like if you look at the investors for 1Password, it's like Hollywood
Yeah,
who's
Ryan
who.
Reynolds. Yeah.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think we were talking about this a week or two ago. It's been really interesting to see how, I think with how complicated copyright and like there's all of these different rights that you have to deal with to be a musician or on TV. And I think it's interesting to see actors starting to work around those things to negotiate better paydays than they can get through traditional channels.
It's always nice to see them using their platforms for good, because like, a lot of celebrities have been targeted since the internet became a thing, and people are compromising other people's like T-Mobile accounts and getting access to their nudes and all that. And we saw a whole mess with that. So it makes sense that they would at least some of them would get involved, right?
Gets a little personal at that point when. Yeah, you're a lightning rod for all the creeps and the scammers out there to come for you.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's gotta suck. Like, I'm sure there's some good things about being a celebrity, but most of it, I want no part of.
Oh.
I can't say that I have a few friends who are probably considered Z-list celebrities, and it's not fun for most of them. Like the ability to not leave your house and never really knowing the true intentions of people around you is really not super fun. I think most executives find the same though.
These are not the same company. So these are different. Whalebone is definitely being Czech. They're focused on EU. They're focused on that part of the world. And it looks like it's just name collision, which we're starting, with over 3,000 companies in cybersecurity. It's inevitable. We're going to start having products of the same name. And in fact, we've seen that for a while already. So, different products, both consumer focused, and both using Aura as a product name.
This is whalebone.io is this company, right?
Yes. Mm-hmm. Neat branding. I like whales. I like trains. All right. Gumbok.ai, we actually had Iftak Ian Amit on here a couple years ago to talk about Gumbok. They're just now raising an 8 million seed. So kind of nice to see some of these startups taking it slow. I want to say it was 2 years ago we had him on. But yeah, good to see his company raising some money there. Ninja One was the big one. They raised $500 million at a $5 billion valuation, and mostly an MDM, EMM that nobody I've talked to has heard of, but apparently they focus heavily on MSPs, selling to the MSP market.
Yeah. My MSP just mentioned them a week ago. So looks like they're making headway.
Mm-hmm.
How long have they been around? Do you know? Anybody?
I think like 2017, something like that. Somebody said the other day.
Okay. I did a bunch of work with MDMs at one point for like a year or so, and this was a new one to me.
What's interesting is that they also offer RMM or EMM, or I don't know what you call it these days, but it's kind of like a lesser form of MDM. So
MAM, I thought it was called. So app management, like not the whole device, just the apps on it.
Possibly, yeah. It seems like it provides more options than the traditional players, which is kind of interesting.
So 2013. They were founded in 2013.
Interesting. Okay.
Oh, they've been around for a while.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know that mobile device management is a business that I would be super excited to get into now, just because it seems like one of those things that is only getting more complicated. And, people do so many things with their phones, and nobody wants to carry a second phone. And
everybody hates it. Like it's a market that needs to be disrupted. And every time you think it's going to be disrupted, like some of the OS query based stuff I thought would kind of take over this market. You still see people with 2 or 3 separate MDMs, like they've got Intune and Jamf because they have Macs and Windows, and like it's not that Intune can't do Macs, but it's missing like 5 or 6 features that are really important to them. And it's, just every year it comes back up again. I see in the Slacks I'm in, the conversations. All right, I'm at a new place. What are you guys using now? What's everybody using for MDM now? Is there anything that doesn't suck?
No,
it's really hard to keep up.
Yeah.
Yeah, they're kind of a commodity, I feel like.
Yeah.
It's an extremely frustrating problem to deal with, though, because when I was working on it, at least, I don't think this has changed that much. You've got these companies that are trying to build in security into mobile devices, and they're so jailed up in the operating system that things that companies want to have is just like, yeah, the only way we could do that really would be to exploit the device, and wedge ourselves into places. And so a lot of things that, we went through this massive evaluation with different providers and stuff like that. And one of the things that kept coming up is, well, we can't do that on Android because of this. We can't do that on Apple because of that. And they're really constrained. The rules that are put in place on the mobile devices are very constrictive, even for, security platforms. Mm-hmm. Not much a way around it.
Well, people always ask me why I carry 2 phones. And I also think they're still very murky, because I've yet to have an employer where I could say, if you get sued, tell me how much of my phone is discoverable. Tell me how much barrier you have in place to prevent my nudes from ending up on the stand in some IP lawsuit. That's just always, I'm like, I think when the kind of smartphone thing became a thing, I was in finance, everybody gets a work phone because you just can't put enough controls on a personal device. And so when I moved to an industry where I could use my personal device, it was just like, why would I do that? I understand carrying a second phone's not convenient, but I think we were talking about this at the conference we were out last week. It's like not having a burner Reddit account. Like you just don't mix business and pleasure.
I tell you, one time we were testing out AirWatch and we accidentally wiped two people's phones and they did not have any kind of backups of all their family photos. They were all about carrying two different phones after that.
Yep.
I think part of the blame is also the vendors. Like, Android has work profile, right? And I think Apple is just catching up. So, it's just providing these standards that we've had this problem for a while. Why are the vendors not like helping make this problem go away? So
asymmetric power. If you have to have it. And I think that's one of the things that's always been like an issue in technology is some of these things that are like have to haves where you don't really have a choice. I mean, there are, I think, a lot of things in the enterprise we can look at like that, like phone routing systems are another one. It's like they're so archaic and the trash, but because you have to have one, there aren't a lot of great options.
Yeah.
So Votiro is a company I remember from back when I was an industry analyst, and I had to look it up, but sure enough, they were founded in 2012. They raised some seed back in like 2016. They must have been somewhat bootstrapped because they didn't raise a Series A until 2023 after they'd been around for 11 years and just got acquired by Menlo Security. And if I recall correctly, I want to say they were like reassembling files. They were one of these companies like to get rid of malware. Basically you just change the format of the file, to get rid of any macros that might be built in or any additional stuff added to a PDF or something like that. So file sanitization is what my brain is telling me they used to do. The notes from that time are in a OneNote file somewhere that I do not have open at the moment because I've moved 2 note-taking platforms or 3 note-taking platforms since then. But yeah, I don't know what happened to them, but they got acquired for $37.5 million after raising $25.5 million in funding. So I guess they, that sounds like a distress sale a little bit there. But I mean, it is an exit though.
Their tagline is currently zero trust data detection and response. So
got to throw zero trust.
I was just thinking, ZTDDR. That's what.
Zero trust dance revolution.
Oh my gosh. I'm literally working on a blog post right now around abbreviations and their meanings and stuff. It's anytime somebody says something like that, I'm just like
a blog post, I don't even want to think about it. Yeah.
It's a glossary kind of thing that's kind of under a blog, but it doesn't matter. It's just painful. Yeah,
it's a useful technology. Clearly, it's something that's more of a feature. I don't know if I go out of my way to get a vendor just to sanitize files. Like, I feel like that should be just a feature of an email gateway, a secure email gateway, or an enterprise browser, or any of the different methods you could receive files by, right?
Oh, if you could do that. Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, I feel like I've seen consolidation into email security companies recently where some of them might do good automation or threat detection response, but wouldn't make sense to do it standalone.
Yeah, and Menlo's basically enterprise browser at this point, right? Yeah. So it makes sense for them to do this acquisition.
I wish somebody would combine something like this with the thing I keep complaining about, which is comparing files to an existing database of sensitive files where those files should not be stored. So if you're going to...
That was a thing.
Tear apart
that was So Terbium Labs, and there was another one that did this, that would create hashes of not only files, but parts of files. And then they would go out and they'd hash the entire dark web. And they had this massive database of everything they found on deep and dark web. And they would tell you if they had any matches between your stuff and the stuff that they found out there, which sounds like an impossible thing to do, like just incredibly resource intensive. And I can't recall what happened to them. It was Terbium Labs, and I forget if Digital Shadows did any of that. But there have been attempts at such a thing.
If I download a file from my Google Drive to my work laptop, it takes that file apart, makes sure it's not malicious, but then also compares it to enterprise data and says, hey, this is a tier 3, very sensitive piece of data. Not only do you not have access to this, but we need to know that you just downloaded it to your endpoint. Like we were talking about, Adrian, with your dirty downloads folder.
Yeah. It's a mess. It's a messy download folder. Don't send it. Don't make it sound like it's weird.
No, I just meant, sorry, maybe I should say disorganized downloads.
Right.
Instead.
It's not full of porn. It's just a mess. It's just PDFs, spreadsheets.
Just PII. Other kinds of personally identifying things.
Photos of my passport, normal stuff everyone has in their downloads folder. Actually, my partner was showing me a tool the other day, some kind of AI tool that would auto arrange your files. Like it would come up with the folder names, the organizational structure, move everything in there. I was like, whoa, like that could be really cool or really piss me off, right? But for a while, I've just been, I use a service called Everything. And I just hit a hotkey on my system and it brings up a search box. And it's like, imagine if your built-in search worked and instantly found any file that you're looking for. And that's basically what this does. So on Mac, you don't really need that as much. The search works pretty well. But on Windows, we don't have something like that. So
I feel like if you let AI do it, it would be like, I just had cleaners come to my house a week ago, and I haven't had a cleaner come through my house in like a year, I'm ashamed to say. Not because we've been doing a really good job. But you end up, when you have a cleaner come through your house and they organize stuff, you end up with these little bowls everywhere.
Yeah.
And they're just these like catch-all bowls. And you might find like a third of your MacBook charger in there and like some lip gloss and like a thumbtack. I feel like you'd end up with just these files full of like.
Look, I'm cleaning your house, not organizing it. You figure out where to put the stuff, right?
Yeah.
My Notion, I need to clean up my Notion, and it's just so bad. Like I don't know if I'd rather clean my Notion or clean my house. I can't decide.
But like if search is good, I feel like I don't need to organize as much. Like it would be nice if I had 5 versions. Adrian, why do you have 5 versions of PCI 4.0 PDF, right? Just delete the other 3 versions of it or 4 versions of it. So I just have one. Like some cleaning would be useful there. Or, the VMware player install exe. I don't think you need that anymore. Like it's taking up space. But it's something we were talking about at, so I'm using the Arc browser, and we were talking about this at Zero Trust World, this idea that a lot of things that we only need in a certain time frame. Like I'm going to share this file with you. The default should be share this file for 24 hours, not share forever, but the default is share forever. Or like once I've downloaded and installed something, you know what, maybe clean it up. And Arc browser defaults to, I think it's 8 hours. If you haven't touched a tab in 8 hours, it just sweeps it into the archive. You can still go back in there and find it, but you don't end up with 230 tabs all day, every day, like spending an hour a day looking for the right tab, right? And it's gotten to the point where Chrome has search for your tabs, which seems like we've gone off the deep end a little bit, right? Like I remember a time when browsers had no tabs. Now we have a search for tabs because you've got 230 tabs open across 5 windows, right?
I'm feeling a little attacked by that right now.
All right, let's move on here. And speaking of feeling attacked, Jason, do you want to talk about number 3?
That's
the Joint Cybersecurity Advisory. Was that the one you wanted to talk about?
Number five is a Joint Cybersecurity Advisory.
Oh, mine are all. Oh, yeah.
Well,
if it's the one you wanted to talk about, go for it. Mine are mixed up on mine.
This was. I thought you hear a whole lot about intrusions. Like it's all about identity. They steal usernames and passwords. They log in. That's how ransomware happens. That's how all of this works. And, which is true. However, this advisory from who put this out? This was authored by the Department of Justice, CISA, and the multi-state ISAC. Put this together about ghost ransomware or cringe ransomware, which they get apparently from the names of the EXEs. And they're walking through how does this work? What's their initial access? And it is they exploit publicly facing applications. Be that, and some of these are really well known stuff. I've seen it with custom web apps in intrusions, but here they're talking about vulnerable Fortinet devices, or heaven help us, Adobe Cold Fusion apparently is still running around out there with CVEs back to 2009, 2010 that are being exploited. So yeah, they're teenagers. SharePoint, Exchange, etc. They're talking about basically a proxy shell type of attack, but they exploit the application. They drop a web shell down on the host, and then they use that web shell to facilitate their access to pull tools down, load up Cobalt Strike, get that executing on the system for their command and control, and then do their defense evasion, and eventually try and deploy their ransomware. They'll also do stuff like, and you would see this all the time in ransomware intrusions, where they get on one host. They just launched like network scans. So they mentioned Sharp NBT scan, for example, but I remember ns.exe was one that you would see running rampant to find where the data is. And then they start doing the encryption or threatening to do it. One of the things I thought was kind of funny that they mentioned in here is that the ghost ransom notes claim to have exfiltrated a lot of data, and they're going to sell that data off if the ransom doesn't get paid. But frequently they don't actually exfiltrate very much at all. This is just a threat that they trot out to scare somebody into paying out. But I guess the big takeaway as I looked at this, to me, this was fairly normal. But I've seen some discussions, blog posts and stuff like that, where this is how an intrusion takes place. And you get, they use this MITRE technique and this sub technique and this technique, and they do this, and here are so they log in with stolen credentials, they phish, and this is how it happens. Well, that's not always the case. They're going to exploit public applications. They're going to use that door as well. We're going to talk about infostealers, I think, in a bit. I already made a comment about which article, which is another method of getting that initial access so that they can then go do the things. Not a lot exciting in this. I just looked at it and thought, hey, we need to keep an open mind. These hackers are going to do what they decide to do. They're not going to fit into the nice boxes that are tempting to create for them and say, this is how they like to operate. So,
yeah, I mean, my question here is how, is kind of like with the Mirai botnet, right? Like, how have these lasted on the public internet for this long and are just now getting hit? Like, is somebody putting old stuff out on the internet, like new? Like they found it in a closet and they're like, let's open this up to the internet.
Talk about
or has it always been there?
there?
Or has it always been there the whole time and just gotten passed up? Like I'm having trouble understanding how
they finally organized their files and like they found.
They got this cool search engine thing for this sort of thing, and they use that.
They do. There are search engines for that.
I know
it's called Shodan.
Yeah, I still read about Log4j exploitations, which I know hasn't been 10 years old, but had so much attention. You'd think it would be remediated or taken offline at that point. But it's continuing to be a problem.
It's almost 4 years ago now, I think. I think it was late 2021.
I remember talking to, now this wasn't security per se, this was a backup system and the whole bit, but it's the same kind of thing. You're seeing a problem. We've got something hanging out here and it's going to bite us in the rear end really badly. And we're making all the justifications, and the response we got back from the president of the company is, well, nothing bad has happened yet, so no.
Well, that's my favorite phrase, by the way. Nothing bad has happened yet.
That was the end of it. Phrase. I mean, I lost.
I also think just like there are some really crappy pen testers out there. Like We've all met some pretty subpar, like kind of local security people who manage security for a handful of businesses that their dad probably knows. And so, I think if you think about their kind of calculation of ROI on, do I go remediate all of these things, or do I just take a chance that nobody's going to hack the grocery store around the corner? That's, not realizing that you can move laterally from that to other things. I think that there's just a lot of negligence in a lot of these things, and that it's never happened before. So why would we assume it's going to happen now? Not understanding that the ability to automate scanning for these types of vulnerabilities, hackers aren't lagging behind and using AI tools for these types of things, unfortunately.
It was the first time for everything. Like the nearest neighbor attack was pretty neat. I don't know if all you guys saw that, but I'm going to hack into the architectural firm that's across the street from the State Department, and I'm going to use their Wi-Fi network to get into that Wi-Fi network. So that was the first time we saw that attack, and that's been possible since Wi-Fi has been a thing, right? And the reason they went for that is on the Wi-Fi, MFA was not enabled, whereas coming in through like Outlook or something like that, it was enabled. So from Russia, they're able to get into this Wi-Fi network by hacking someone who's physically close enough, whose machines are dual homed and physically close enough to connect to that Wi-Fi network across the street, which was just wild to me. I mean, it's not all that sophisticated when you think about it, but like, who did it occur to? It never occurred to me to do that as a pen. Well, obviously you can't do that as a pen tester. The architectural firm's not the client, right?
I mean, regardless of how sophisticated it is, somebody got clever and they figured out that they could pull this off. And I mean, I remember
we can't jump on a plane and go to DC to hit the Wi-Fi. What else could we do?
Yeah, you had the brute force attacks against Azure and like M365, where they have lockout thresholds based on IP addresses and geolocations and stuff. And so what they do, the bad guys do, they attack a bunch of home routers in the area, and then they let it loose from there.
Yeah.
Is it sophisticated? No.
You use NordVPN.
It works.
Yeah.
Oh, that fixes everything.
The shitty thing is, if you ignore the human impact of some of these things, like it's a fun challenge. And generally people don't become hackers because they have, 50-hour-a-week day jobs that are paying really well. So they need something else to do on the side. These are the kind of ratio of time to invest versus what a big hit on one of these things can look like is not. I mean, it goes back to, if you don't find creative ways to put these people to work on the good guy side, they're going to make their money somehow. I was just reading about an attack. Kaspersky talked about it last year, but on air gap devices. And I think that I used to run into that a lot at the financial institutions who use some of the security products I worked with. Is, they're like, oh, well, this piece of our network is air gap. So, it's best practice, but you can't get to it. So, and there's multiple nation state based attacks that they found now that you can traverse air gap networks with electric signals, which is really fun.
I did an interview with Dirk Manke over at Fortinet Labs maybe a year or two ago, and like that was one of the rising. We were talking about trends, and like USB as an attack vector was like a rising trend in malware a couple of years ago. And I was like, what in the Stuxnet is going on here?
Yeah, I've actually. They do physical penetration tests at, data centers and places that have server rooms and things, where they'll drop a USB drive and see what people do about it. Whether
I've done USB drops. Absolutely.
Yeah, it's stupid enough to be like, I wonder what's on this, and plugs it into their work computer.
It's not stupid if it works.
Yeah. Well, I know, and I'm just thinking that I would be a prime victim for that because I'm curious F, and the thought of turning something over and not actually knowing what's on it would just drive me insane.
I had a Chromebook dedicated for that. That was that Chromebook's job, is to plug in weird USB devices.
Yeah, I have a couple repurposed broken kid Chromebooks for that.
Yeah. Ryan, it sounded like you were eager to talk about maybe number 2, number 3, some of the attack trends here.
Yeah, I can definitely talk about number 2. I find the business and incentives behind ransomware payments really interesting. So the article talked about how payments dropped 35% in 2024, first decrease in a couple of years. I read a report recently talking about how any threat actors, a lot of the times it's using affiliate organizations and they are a business, but just the reputation behind the threat actors. The statistic, I think it was Poneman Institute, said that for people who did pay, about 30 to 35% of the time, either the decryption keys didn't work or they demanded more payment. So, it might be less reputable, people less willing to pay. Article also talks about law enforcement and tracking down Bitcoin and ransomware payments. So I'm really
I hate
interested.
those less reputable criminals.
We need
Yeah,
proper,
we talk
pros.
a lot about ransomware negotiators and how they have these profiles on these threat actors and understand their personality. So, there's customer support lines sometimes. They're just basically running a business.
Some of the negotiators also, like, I wonder how much, there's like a pre-worked out thing. Like some of those guys are kind of in a gray space as well, I feel like.
Yeah. I haven't worked too much with ransomware negotiators, but definitely an interesting space. So yeah, I'm interested to see, which way the trends go. It's great to see that ransomware payments are dropping. And then similar to what we were just talking about before, you get these small mom and pop shops who aren't as concerned because they're small, they figure they're not a target. But typically it's those SMBs that you see targeted that may not have a security team, minimal budget. We're not talking about the financial service institutions with seemingly unlimited security budgets and all the tool sets and 20-person IAM staffs. So it's something that you really do need to keep on top of because even if it's not a huge payment, they could take down a company within days. It also talks about how quickly ransomware is deployed and the dwell time for how long they're in there to deploying ransomware. I was reading an article before this that it was 2 hours from the initial intrusion. So the business is definitely interesting.
It's a lot cheaper to pay for redundancy and backup than it is to pay a ransom. And I think a lot of businesses just roll the dice on that.
I think one of the things that surprised me, I talked to somebody, airport conversation. He owns a managed IT provider. He thought he had all of the boxes checked. They get hit with ransomware through a Kaseya vulnerability. The ransomware folks were kind enough to use that to deploy to all of their customers, right? And so they're like, okay, no problem. We've got backups. They'd planned for some of this stuff. They talked to their backup provider, and the backup provider's like, yeah, we can maybe recover 12 boxes per day, maybe. And yeah, exactly.
You got to factor that in. Like I remember after the CrowdStrike thing, the Delta CEO being on TV being like, yeah, we got to manually recover 40,000 Windows Server BitLocker keys. I'm like,
yeah.
Why do you have 40,000 Windows servers, first of all? Like, no, thank you.
Yeah,
you get these procedures. Hardware. You get these procedures for this stuff, but what does it look like when it's really under stress? I mean, it's great to restore a backup once or twice to make sure that they work, but what does it look like when you gotta hammer it?
I remember prepping for DR. I worked at a large payment provider, and we were going through our DR planning, and I did the calculations and found out that the day before our next full backup on our main customer database, the main system that all the call center used to support customers, it would take us 14 days of just pushing in tapes to recover if we had an incident and had to recover that final day of partials before the next full backup. And it was just, that was not going to work. Right. So we ended up paying EMC a bunch of money and set up an HA, where we had live replication between sites, and, it changed our whole architecture. Like we just scrapped the whole DR plan because it was just not going to work.
I think practicality versus policy is often where security goes awry, right? Because that's also
Mhm.
assuming that all of those tapes work, right? And I don't
Right.
know that
It's
any
assuming a lot of
enterprise has
things.
ever restored via tape and found out that they're pretty temperamental if you don't have the perfect temperature and humidity conditions.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
assuming I've got the right credentials to even check them out of Iron Mountain, right? And then I've got to drive them down to Atlanta. Like there's a lot of assumptions in there that were never going to be tested unless we had a DR situation. So the one thing that worries me about ransomware payments dropping 35% is I wonder, like, if attackers are having less success with this, where are they turning next? And are we prepared for where they're turning next? So
Yeah,
do you think about that at all, Ryan? Or
I
do you
do.
have any crystal ball there?
Yeah, we see a lot of cases that also incorporate extortion. So it's not, backups are really solid nowadays. So threat actors stealing data, threatening to release it on the dark web and such, that helps crank up the temperature a little bit. No longer just having properly segmented backups and DRs enough. Threat actors know that. Yeah, I think there's been a shift in the last 5 or 10 years of segregating backups and having good disaster recovery. But stealing that data that you don't want released has influenced people maybe to make a payment at that point. Like Jason was alluding to earlier, sometimes they actually don't steal it. We'll run tabletop exercises where the threat actor will claim that they stole this data. And then we ask, well, how do you know that? Do you have any DLP? Do you have SSL decryption? Is someone checking that Tor link? So it's
Yeah.
interesting to validate and then proof of life and such.
And I back during the pandemic, when it was taking months to get a MacBook, like people had trouble hiring people because they were just supply chain was backed up on a bunch of things, including laptop chips and things that they needed there. I was thinking like this is something that's always been in the back of my head ever since Saudi Aramco, and even before that, is okay. What if I just brick 10 MacBooks an hour until you pay up, right? Like how long does it take you to, now your execs don't have machines, your devs don't have machines, your engineers don't. Sure, you can get 100 machines from Dell tomorrow, but they don't know how to use them. Like that's not their tool chain. Their tool chain isn't there. That's not the system that they're used to. So that's a concern I have also is, because in a hostage situation, what do? They take out some hostages, to crank up the heat, and at the firmware level, it's pretty exposed. It's pretty rough. Systems, I don't think look great from a firmware standpoint, just because we haven't been forced to yet.
Yeah, that's one thing I feel like I'd keep my head in the sand as far as firmware. I think I was on your show talking about a guest with firmware security. There's just too much going on with the basics to even think about firmware security. Yeah. So I'm hoping that's not an issue for a while.
Yeah, I like to say it's number 37 on the top critical like ASAP things, right? Like, and I only have time for 6 things on that list, and it's number 37, right? Yeah. Unfortunately. So yeah, infostealers was the other one. We kind of talked about that before. I think you were saying browsers is how they're getting onto systems. I've also seen like illegitimate, like malicious versions of OBS and some software infostealers will tag along with those if you don't download them from the correct site.
Yeah, I was reading the article earlier. It looks like they can have pop-ups that look like system settings on a Mac, but identity is the new perimeter. And if people are able to use their personal laptops or have no controls, the infostealers can steal their credentials, to use, or session tokens to use. And if you're not enforcing device-based MFA, that's a really easy way in. I feel like there's been a huge rise in infostealers recently, not just on MacBooks.
What about Ryan? Sorry.
I was going to say you get the problem of separating personal from work. Like, what Apple ID are you logging into that Mac with? Like, maybe it's a work one, but you're using your personal Apple ID. Yeah, I think that happens a lot.
Yeah.
My question to you, Ryan, is like, do some folks have a false sense of security where, like, say they have anti-malware on there, like SentinelOne or CrowdStrike or whatever it may be, but local admin on their machine is that's not enough, right? I mean, for to prevent this kind of stuff, what would your advice be? Or
Yeah, absolutely. I think EDR is a great step, especially to getting even better on Macs. But local admin is a huge threat vector, and so separating those accounts and using those more as a break glass is the better practice for it. But it's a hard fight to take away local admin for like developers.
yeah,
I mean, I've had it as a security professional, and I would have been frustrated without it. So it's a little hypocritical. So it's hard, whether it's application allow listing or relying as much as you can for EDR. Sometimes that's the best you can do, but it's worth that fight to remove local admin if you can.
And hope that nobody needs to use brew to install something.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. All right. So, Eamon, it sounds like you want to talk about the AI stuff. Jackie, do you know what you want to talk about?
Oh, I was just adding color commentary to the AI stuff. I'll throw in a little tidbit at the end on hiring former CISA professionals, if that's okay.
Okay. Yeah, Eamon, go ahead on I know you've been reading, so we got two items, number 6 and number 7, kind of pointing out that AI isn't, and it's not that it's not useful, it's not generating a ton of new revenue, it sounds like, for companies.
yeah. So Satya Nadella, CEO of Microsoft, doesn't seem to be as bullish as everyone else on AI,
including him 6 months ago.
Yeah, exactly. So it's fascinating. I mean, I asked Perplexity, what's our current global growth right now, and it says about 3.3%. And he's saying it's not like it's caused 10% growth. And there's some other follow-up.
You're talking about like global GDP, right?
Global GDP, correct? Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what his benchmark is, like, okay, AI is revolutionizing one. And it seems I think a lot of us know it will, but he's like, not right now. And even OpenAI loses money on all its subscriptions, on its Pro and its Plus. And there was a follow-up article where Microsoft has pulled away or shifted $80 billion instead of investing in new data centers, which some people are saying that's kind of standard, like when you have such a big budget. But they're saying it just doesn't have good optics. So I think there's a lot of, and then investors are kind of growing increasingly skeptical that AI is not making them the money that they thought it would. So, I don't want to say the B word, right? But people are wondering, okay, I'll just say it. Like, is it a bubble right now or not? It's like, what B word? So Don't be so cryptic, Eamon, which I tend to do. Anyway, so that's kind of like the summary of all that going on.
I think the trough of disillusion is to be expected, right?
Yeah. Just to interject real quick, like one of the trends I'm seeing, I'm a huge framework fanboy. So framework are laptops that are very upgradable, very repairable. Like design one screwdriver, you can take apart the whole thing. You can upgrade the main board, the CPU, everything on them. The screen, like there's a new, better screen. I can just swap it out in 30 minutes. And they just announced today, they had a live presentation today, and announced a desktop computer that's kind of focused for running local AI. So it's running AMD's new AI Max chip, which is kind of competitive with like the highest end Mac Mini out there, or Mac Studio, I think it is, and maybe competitive with the NVIDIA desktop computer. I don't know if you guys saw the announcement that supercomputer on your desk, that we don't know the pricing. We don't know the details of that yet. But this trend of running things locally, because we don't trust these companies to run them for us. And with DeepSeek, we're seeing more and more of these models where we don't need $20 a month. Like they're losing money on $20 a month. And now, like my basic laptop without a discrete GPU can run some of these DeepSeek models really well. So they're not even going to be getting that from us soon in the future. And I don't think they saw the shift to running these open source models locally, using Llama or, whatever you might use to run locally. But you can do all that for free right now.
I've been pushing one of the local community colleges to focus on building like Connex size data centers, something that could fit on an 18-wheeler. You can roll it into an enterprise. They do all of their training and then you roll it out, because I agree. I think that we've over pivoted to the cloud for a lot of things, and it would be a heck of a lot more cost effective to temporarily bring in compute and do it securely than to have to send that all to the cloud. So I think my analyst prediction is that is definitely a burgeoning industry that I don't really know if the big manufacturers know how to take advantage of yet, but it's going to happen.
Microsoft, these companies, they are never going to make it back. Like I remember doing some calculations on the amount of that Microsoft stock went up when they introduced Copilot and all that, and it would be impossible for them to sell enough Copilot licenses if they could sell Copilot licenses. And already we're starting to see them build them into some of these tiers where Copilot's just built in for free. It's just part of your Microsoft 365 subscription, which was a prediction. I'm sure people listening to the show are sick to death hearing me predict. I predicted 18 months after Copilot came out, it would just be built in for free because people are not going to see the value in paying an extra $360 a year per employee for Copilot.
Yeah. Yeah. And even Gemini is being included in different tiers. And so I wonder then if now it's back to the race for data, right? Consumer data and training and all that kind of stuff.
I was just going to ask that. So we know Google's business is built on selling people's data, but Microsoft's historically has not always been. So is that, and maybe that's, those are two very different business models. And like with AI gobbling up a bunch of data is great for Google. And they, that's why they kept Gmail free. That's why they've kept all of their services free. Microsoft doesn't have
the ones that they don't shut down.
Yeah. Microsoft doesn't really have that luxury though, right? So like, how do they pivot as a company if this, to your point, the data is the new gold? Like, how do they take advantage of that when their whole business structure is built for something else?
There's a Copilot button on Windows PCs now. Oh. Like they were so all in on this. Like it's built into the logos for the Microsoft apps. Yeah, I think they really over wrenched on this one.
Well, and the 90s are back. Why didn't they just make it clippy? Honestly, I think it would have done so much better. Yeah. Like my kids are wearing wide leg jeans.
Missed opportunity.
Like, I want clippy back.
Missed opportunity. Totally. All right. Let's see. So this, not really the place to have it now. I would love to have someone who understands how cryptocurrency exchanges work come on and talk about the Bybit one, because it's fascinating to me just because it's such a huge heist. It's even more fascinating that Bybit has enough in the bank to just absorb this. Like maybe they get some of that back. I think it's hard to fence or to launder 1.5 billion in crypto. Like I don't know that all the tumblers in the world are going to save you from, what it's going to be worth to send lawyers and stuff like that after this 1.5 billion. I think it's highly likely they recover some of it at least. But yeah, I had to look up like what are the other biggest heists. So the Bernie Madoff Ponzi scheme, I didn't realize was like the biggest heist ever by far, and it's more of a scheme. So I'm not sure if it's it's not the same as a bank heist. Like it happened over decades.
I was right? Say that took him from the 60s to 2008 when it exploded. So
yeah.
He had a long window to.
So maybe not fair to compare it to. And then this one MDB scandal in Malaysia I'd never heard of. Apparently implicated Goldman Sachs, major banks, celebrities. Malaysia's 1MDB sovereign wealth fund. They stole $4.5 billion. But again, that's like happened over a long period of time. So like the closest we get to this heist is Tajikistan gold smuggling heist. Where they were caught smuggling gold bars to Dubai. I don't know what 1.5 billion in gold bars weighs. So I kind of want to dig into that a bit more and find out how that worked. Like you need a whole container ship for something like that.
My guess is a lot.
Yeah, it was essentially the country's whole reserves.
It's amazing. And Tajikistan is just a really weird country too. Like if you ever have some free time, look for some YouTube videos about Tajikistan. Like only allowed to have white cars in the country. There are all kinds of weird stuff about Tajikistan.
That's environmentally friendly. But just as a side note on banking regulations, so is it surprising they can absorb that loss? Maybe. In the US, banks, we have this thing called the federal deposit ratio, and it basically says how much of your cash a bank actually has to keep in the bank. Most people don't realize when you put money into a bank, that is a liability of the bank, because in the US right now, the bank only has to keep 10% of your cash in your bank that they take and say you have in your bank account. They can loan the other 90% out. So that's how the financial crisis happened, is that banks took, it was usually about 70-75% of the cash that their depositors gave them and made really shitty mortgage loans. So this isn't a whole lot unlike how things work in the US. And we've definitely seen some very large companies lose a lot of money like that and survive.
And honestly, they're kind of making banks look bad here in that they say they provably have 1-to-1 ratio back to what clients have. And so they've got a whole proof of reserves webpage and like a third-party audit and stuff, which, crypto has to work harder than the existing infrastructure to be legitimate, to get the confidence of people to use it. But it still has this irrecoverable, how would I say it? Inability to recover, right? Like once it's gone, it's gone. Like there's no way to build in consumer protection here without somebody just absorbing the loss here. So it still seems like a feature of crypto that's kind of rough. The fact that it's immutable and there's no take backsies. Unless you can use law enforcement to hit up the other exchange that it was transferred to and recover some of it, we see some opportunities there.
I don't know if anybody else was. You can't get into the wallet unless you have the keys to make the transfer to get it out of there. If it's off the exchange, right? If it's in the exchange can still do something about it. Was there anybody else that kind of blinked when Colonial Colonial Pipeline paid the multi-million-dollar ransom, and then a few days later, the FBI stole it back? Mm-hmm. And I'm like, what access do you guys have into that ring that you're like, yep, we're just taking it?
Yeah, if it's within their jurisdiction, they can put some pressure, get that money moved back. I don't know how you steal 1.5 billion and get away with it. So we'll have to keep
contract.
Yeah. So you could do a whole episode on this, or we could. So I've reached out to a few experts that I know. I know some CISOs at crypto exchanges. So we'll see if we can get somebody to come on and explain how some of this might have happened, because I don't understand the connection between cold wallets and hot wallets, and then there's warm situations. Like to me, a cold wallet is like, those little devices. Right. But I'm sure at an exchange, it's much more complex than that. They're not just carrying around ledgers. They don't have a ledger in a safety deposit box. I'm sure it's got to be a little bit more complex, or maybe it's not. And I'll be shocked. I don't know.
Yeah, it's just like banks in the US, and it's a COBOL server in a closet. And if you turn the wrong light switch off, it turns off.
I think Jackie was, when we were at Backstory talking about this, I think Jackie was onto it. I asked ChatGPT, like, tell me what this is about. And when she mentioned that, Jackie, you mentioned like you could be a UI attack. And
yeah, so it looks like essentially what they did is they rewrote the protocol of the contract itself, and then they used a pretty sophisticated UI spoof. So this is, I'm totally pulling this out of my ass, and we do need to get an expert. But it sounds essentially like if you have a cold wallet and a warm wallet as a company, you need to occasionally move funds from the cold wallet to the warm wallet when people want to withdraw or do whatever with them, right? So I'm guessing that something like this happened. Somebody was instructed to move money from one place to the other, and a UI spoof moved significantly more. But I haven't dug far enough into it because I was prepping for all the other stuff we were going to talk about. But Yeah, this seems like a very multi-layered attack. And again, got a lot of people sitting around with no jobs and not a lot better to do than figure out ways to breach the unbreachable contract. And it's a challenge in and of itself, right?
Yeah, I think ChatGPT is basically saying when you move from, and Adrian, feel free to stop me, like, but we're hypothesizing, we don't know what happened, right? But like when you move from a cold wallet to a warm wallet, you still have to sign it and all that kind of stuff. So there's like a signing interface that probably got exploited. So when they are actually like moving it from cold to warm, that's the area where it got attacked.
Okay,
so
yeah.
they didn't have the two armored guys, two armored people in a truck, protecting the signing. It was just like some guy in a machine at their home, without EDR on their machine.
Yeah.
Wasn't there a movie in the early 2000s where they like spoof an armored truck and end up like, is it Casino? What movie was that? Or no?
7, what's it called? Ocean?
No, Ocean's 11. Yes, Ocean's 11, where they make themselves look like, it's kind of like that, right?
Yeah.
In unrelated news, I hear that North Korea's GDP just bumped up by $1.5 billion.
How did that happen?
I don't know. It's unrelated. All right. Wrapping up here. Number 8. I'd never heard of the Write a Boom conference. I'm kind of wish I had heard about it before. It sounds pretty cool. And so this story is about CIS. So Center for Internet Security, who does all the benchmarks, and what used to be the SANS top 20 is now became the CIS top 20, and now it's a top 18. They're now developing controls for MSP. So I found this very exciting because back when I started a consulting organization, we kind of unintentionally built a tool to test MSP's capabilities and found them lacking quite a bit in many cases, where they're just completely blind to what was going on. So I think this is really cool. I think we're at a point where we need to kind of systematically test things and make sure they actually work. And even more so when we're outsourcing security controls to other companies, there needs to be some, like, you need to show me that you're actually going to see bad stuff happening on my devices, whether you're looking at EDR, SIM, whatever that managed capability is. So seeing somebody build kind of a framework around that's really cool.
Yeah. At the conference we were at last week, we talked about this with a group of CISOs and what's the easiest way to start implementing some like standard of care or regulation or something in security that establishes like a baseline of protection. And that was actually where we kind of all agreed was MSPs are a great place to start, because if you establish a standard of care for MSPs and a way to hold them accountable to that, you're really making a significant decision when you don't use one as a smaller company who's trying to go it alone with 8 people on your security team. Because if you know what you're giving up when you're giving up, because it's this whole murky thing. Like, when do I go from my brother who knows IT to my friend who kind of knows SentinelOne to I need to use an MSP? So I think this is a phenomenal move in the right direction, because to me, the vast majority of people should be using service providers, not going it alone. Right. So we can give them some level of assurance as to what they're getting and what they don't know and how to test for what they don't know. Because it's the same thing in finance. It's like, I don't want to pick a financial advisor if I don't know how, so I'm just going to leave my money in cash, right?
Right. Yeah. So Google confirms they're ditching SMS code authentication. So MFA, SMS MFA, is going to happen eventually. It can't be an easy decision, but cool to see that. Google says commercial quantum computing applications arriving within 5 years. Does that mean we're going to be breaking RSA keys? I doubt it. And even if we are, I don't think it's all that important. We don't see many breaches that occur because you're using TLS 1.2 instead of 1.3, right? So, I don't think that's going to, people are going to keep pushing and they should update their post quantum algorithms, but yeah, I think that's another place that's been very much overhyped. Number 11 is just a website that's a cool collection of open source cloud security tools that I came across. So looks like a cool thing to browse, or if you're looking for a tool, it's got a search bar and you can you can browse it by category and things like that. So I thought
They're
that
pretty
was
well marked
cool.
up with tags and stuff too. We're like, I need something with S3. Type in the tag. There you go.
And then that brings us to our squirrel story, which is a woman whose last name is Null keeps running into trouble with computer systems for some odd reason. So I learned a lot about Null. I learned that the creator calls it his $1 billion mistake and has regrets coming up with it. I found out it's only an issue in certain programming languages. It's a neat article in that it goes a little bit deeper, like into the history of like why does Null mean what it does.
What's interesting is I guess her husband hasn't had issues. He's a little older. I guess he's not using technology as much. So don't want to assume anything, but it's interesting. How do you solve that?
Hyphenate your last name.
Yeah.
Dash, drop, tables.
Bobby drop tables Null.
Yeah. I'm renting the house I'm in right now, and my landlord has the same first and last name, and his wife has the same first and last name. Like his name, they're Chinese, and I think this happens in China frequently. So like his first name is his last name. So it's the same name, two names in a row, and his wife is a different two names. And I always just wonder if that causes issues, because when they're processing paperwork, they're like, you can't have the same first name and last name, right? It would be like Smith and Jones. Like that's basically how their names are listed on all of the stuff I get. So I'm like, either I'm renting a house from like a Chinese spy and missing all of the red flags, or it's just a different name convention. But yeah, I was wondering the same thing about like, do they get flagged for having, the same value for first and last name?
Yeah, I was having lunch with somebody who's going to be on the podcast in a couple weeks for Greylog, and he has a lot of family in India, and he says in some places in South India, like last names aren't really a thing. And so they only use them when they're kind of forced to, because a form requires them to put something in there. And he was telling me the story of family he has where they're like, yeah, Mom, what's my last name? It's this is what we've used in the past. How's that spelled? I don't know. They spell it phonetically. And if you speak a little different in one place than another, like they just spell it differently. So they just, spell it off of vibes, and that doesn't really work in other places. In Europe and in the US, like your name's not going to come up if it's not spelled the same way every time.
We did the same thing here, though, in Western Europe, where you got Johnson and Johnson, SON versus SEN, or variations of that. Where why did that happen? Well, this guy spelled it that way, and then these other folks spelled it that way, and it got codified somewhere along the way, and we stuck with it. But
somebody was processing.
They're just a little further back in the process.
Somebody was processing, 50% more immigrants that day at that point, and they're like, "No, this is what you get."
Yeah, you hear about those stories.
Like too. Next, but my name isn't next.
Yeah.
There's like 8 different ways to spell McGuire. My maiden name's McGinnis. There's like 8 different ways to spell McGinnis. I feel like Irish people just maybe weren't that literate when they got here.
Could be. And a lot of people change their names, persecuted minorities and stuff like that, would modify them or change them in some way, so it got very creative. There are a bunch of different spellings of names that you can trace back all to the same original name, right? They just didn't want to sound Irish or Jewish or, German. Whatever was the thing that people were hating on at the time. Well, thank you all so much for joining me today. Jason, Jackie, Ryan, Eamon. I've never had so many people on a. Did we have this many last news segment? I feel like we had at least 4, if not 5.
It's a pretty full house. I'm not sure where we're at, but it's a pretty full house.
It's feeling like old school Paul Security Weekly over here.
That it is.
It's Adrian's security party.
Yeah, I love it. I love the party. A lot of good conversations today. Decided to go a little bit long because there's some great stuff great stories to talk about today. Some great conversations. Appreciate you all for hanging out with me to talk about that stuff.
Oh, quick side note. Jen Easterly, the wonderful former head of CISA, posted to LinkedIn. She's set up a matchmaking service basically for employers looking for security professionals and former CISA professionals. So if you check her out on LinkedIn, she's got a link. It's basically just a Google form. You can tell them who you're looking for, and they've got a whole community of people who've recently departed CISA who are looking for roles in security. So I don't want to hear you can't find good people.
Yep. Yeah, it's one thing about our community is we come together when stuff like that happens and help people get jobs. So always good to see that. All right, big thanks to everyone watching or listening to this week's episode of Enterprise Security Weekly. Next week, we'll be talking to Benny Vasquez, who is the chair of the board of directors at the Alma Linux OS Foundation. Why Alma Linux? There's a good reason, but you'll have to join next week to find out. We'll see you then. Bye, everybody.